DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We appreciate you being with us. Sorry for a little technical stuff there off the top of the program, but that's all cleared up, taken care of. We are ready to rock and roll and glad to have you with us. It's a Tuesday. That means Jeff Sintel for a little recruiting talk. We're also going to talk about some interesting statistical stuff that's out there for Georgia. Why, listen, right in the mix of all that national championship talk in 2019 belongs to Georgia Bulldogs. We'll tell you about that. We'll also have a reaction to Tom Crean's apology for some of his controversial comments over the weekend. It's a busy show for us. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
From time to time, we like to go back in time. We're going to start our program today by doing that. Let's go back to January of 2018. Georgia was getting ready to play Alabama in the national championship, and Kirby Smart said some things at the time that were pretty interesting. Now, this is one of those things that, and listen, for someone like me that talks every day, will always pay close attention to this kind of stuff. But this is the kind of thing that if you wanted to spin this in a certain direction, this could have been spun as, ooh, Kirby Smart taking a shot at his former employer, Alabama, suggesting that mighty Alabama is not what it once was. That's not what Kirby Smart meant. But there was a way of hearing some of these words that almost made you feel that way, because the overall text of the quote you're about to hear from Kirby is, Alabama's not as unbeatable as it used to be. Now, Alabama's still really, really good, and they've beaten Georgia head-to-head 2 times now over the course of really a calendar year in 2018. But nonetheless, what Kirby Smart said over a year ago has now started to feel like, maybe it is coming true, not just in relationship to Alabama's relationship with Georgia, but the rest of the SEC. Let me go back in time, let you hear some from Kirby Smart, and we want to build towards what I think is a pretty interesting prediction about how the SEC could look in 2019. So let's go back to January of 2018. Dogs getting ready to play Alabama in the national championship, and Kirby Smart was asked about that perch that Alabama had been on for quite some time, and Kirby says, listen, the rest of the SEC is coming up pretty strong and pretty fast here as well. Here is Kirby then.
I honestly believe that the league is more equal than it's ever been, and that's mainly because I think, maybe Alabama's not as unbeatable as they have been, and they've had games that were closer. You look at their margin of victory on Texas A&M and Mississippi State, I think the league is closer to even. So I don't see it as there's just the 3 great teams and everybody else. Every team we played, I think South Carolina was much better this year than anybody gave them credit for. Kentucky, same way. Missouri had a great finish. I respect our league.
So it's easy to gravitate towards what Kirby Smart says there at the beginning. Alabama's not as unbeatable as they once were, especially given the fact that Kirby used to work at Alabama. And if you grab too much onto the beginning part of that quote, you miss the end part of that quote, where Kirby says, hey, the rest of the SEC is catching up. It's not just Georgia rising up. It's the rest of the SEC becoming a much more even and equal league. And I think there is some evidence to suggest that some of what Kirby Smart says there is starting to be true. In fact, even on that day, January of 2018, in the build-up towards that national championship game, Kirby did go into a little bit more detail about what he meant by the way the rest of this league seems to be improving right now. Here's more from Kirby from then.
I don't know that they're all vulnerable. I think everybody else has gotten better. I don't think it's like Alabama's come down to anybody's level. I think the league is trying to catch up with them. It's certainly been that way for how many years? I don't know, 7, 8 years. Everybody's trying to catch up to them. And when everybody's coming in and taking your coaches and taking your quality control guys and taking your every assistant you can have, you think about there's almost somebody from Alabama on every single staff in our conference. So that gap, Coach Saban, and I'm learning that now, you've got to find people to replace the people. And you're always trying to get better when you lose somebody. Well, sometimes you lose good people.
That's been a big topic of conversation on this show, too, the way that there seems to be an unlimited supply of former Saban assistants to become head coaches, but there's not necessarily an unlimited supply of assistant coaches to work with those new head coaches, and you almost end up having this situation where the same SEC teams or Deep South college football teams pass around the same assistants back and forth over and over again because there's just not enough of those to go around. But the overall point that Kirby Smart's trying to make there is look at the rest of the SEC and the way that it's improving, the way that it's getting better. A lot of teams copying that process that Nick Saban and Alabama made famous for all those years, And all of a sudden you're seeing that benefit a lot of different SEC programs. Well, the proof would seem to be in the pudding based on what Kirby Smart says there. Let me cite here for a moment Bill Conley. Now, you've heard me talk about Conley before. That's the college football stats guru. He's famous for footballstudyhall.com. He does the S&P formula. It's basically a mathematical equation to figure out which college football teams are best. I don't necessarily understand how all the data is crunched. I don't know that you need to necessarily understand it all to find it to be interesting, but he's got his preseason projections out. Now, this is something you got to understand and be very clear about this. This is not the same thing as a way too early top 25 where you or I, either one, could just get a sheet of paper and a pen and start writing the 25 teams we think are going to be best. That's based on our opinions, and it's not wrong to share your opinions, but in some cases it's more interesting to go a little deeper than that. And that's what Conley does by looking at returning production and looking at your 5-year average, look at what you've done at recruiting, and he gets a projection of how he thinks teams are going to perform this year. When Conley, who released these this week, looks at his 2019 projections, my goodness, you see a lot of SEC teams in the mix. And so what Kirby Smart said way back in January of 2018 statistically would seem to be proven true for right now. Conley's preseason projections, he's got Alabama number 1. That's no real big surprise. Georgia number 2. That's probably not a big surprise either. Then it's LSU at 4, Florida at 6, Auburn at 8, Mississippi State at 10, Missouri at 16, South Carolina at 18, Tennessee at 21. Now, let me correct myself here because I omitted a team from this. You've also got Texas A&M, which comes in at number in the top 20. So my bad for excluding Texas A&M, but they're in there as well. Let's keep that up for a second if you don't mind. All those SEC teams in the mix there, all of those teams that are creeping ever so close to the line that Alabama's been on and the line that Georgia's on as well. What Kirby Smart said that the rest of the SEC improving would seem to be true. Tennessee has used Jeremy Pruitt, the blueprint that he learned from Nick Saban, to get in there. Will Muschamp, cut from the same cloth of Kirby Smart. Even though the win-loss record hasn't always worked out the way it's supposed to for the Gamecocks, they have certainly made big strides and big steps forward. Missouri, not just led by Barry Odom, but last year the offensive coordinator Derek Dooley, who's also worked within those Saban coaching circles. All of a sudden, Missouri's making its move. Mississippi State was a very tough out a year ago, to say nothing of programs like Auburn. So I think it's interesting stuff that statistically you've got some proof in the pudding of what Kirby Smart projected to be true way back in January of 2018. And the question becomes, well, what do you do with all of this? What does it mean if all these teams, according to a big-time stats guru, are projected to do really well this upcoming season? Well, obviously, what Kirby projected way back in January of 2018 could have been spun as a threat to Alabama. Watch out for all these SEC teams rising up and being much better this upcoming season and in future seasons. That could have been seen as a threat to Alabama. But now you've got a scenario where Georgia's won the SECs the last 2 years and really had a pretty easy time in doing it. It's won all of its games in the SEC East by at least 2 touchdowns for the last couple of years. That's an unprecedented run of success in the division. And part of that's been due to how good Georgia has been, but admittedly part of that's also been the fact that Florida has been really down. Jim McElwain drove that program into a ditch. Butch Jones treated the Tennessee program like a rental car. I mean, you had these scenarios where these coaches out there were not good stewards of the program they were given access to, and Georgia benefited from that. Blowout wins against both those programs really the last couple of years. All of a sudden, when you see the statistical evaluation of teams like Missouri and South Carolina and Tennessee and Florida, all of a sudden it's not just a little bit tougher road for Alabama to navigate here in 2019, but it's also a little tougher situation for Georgia to navigate as well. Now, I think that Georgia's still going to be the overwhelming favorite in the SEC East. They'll still punch their ticket to Atlanta in all likelihood and get to the SEC championship and maybe the college football playoff beyond that. But the cakewalk of guaranteed victories in the division, it's not quite as assured as it once was, as a lot of these SEC teams start to get better. But then probably the bigger, larger point becomes this. There are a lot of people in the college football media sphere right now who have made a living over being the anti-SEC guy, the thought being, well, there's so much pro-SEC media, let me stake a claim to being the anti-SEC guy. You know, Fox Sports got their version of this. Danny Cannell's been crawling around doing that stuff for years. In the face of this kind of data, that kind of grift, which is really what it is, becomes even more just absurd in the face of the overwhelming data that there really is no conference out there playing at the level that the SEC is right now. It's one of the reasons why Georgia fans got so frustrated after last December, that Georgia was somehow penalized for coming up a couple yards and a couple points short against Alabama, but then kind of thrown into the hopper and just compared evenly with a lot of other college football teams that didn't have to navigate the same tough waters to get into the college football playoff conversation. Now, of course, that's all water under the bridge now because Georgia didn't hold up to its end of the deal in the Sugar Bowl, didn't handle itself very well in the face of that playoff discussion a year ago. We've certainly admitted that. And I think even Georgia itself has kind of admitted that it needs to, as it said over and over again, do more. But the challenge here for Georgia moving forward in the face of all of this is to say, even with the strength of the SEC, Georgia's got a job this season, which is to go out and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only does it play in the premier conference, but it's the premier team in that conference. And this head-to-head collision that so many people have seen Georgia and Alabama seemingly on once again, yeah, it indeed may happen. And this time, Georgia fans hope for a lot better outcome when these two teams get to Atlanta. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed. We're also on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available in podcast form wherever podcasts can be found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We just really appreciate you being a part of the program today. We love Tuesdays here around DawgNation as well because coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be able to talk to Jeff Sintel. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All with Jeff, and really the 2020 recruiting cycle has begun in earnest now. I love the way that Jeff closed out his conversation with us on Friday when he started rattling off some of those names to know for that 2020 class. And, well, listen, I think you're already starting to see some news start to develop with some of those guys. We'll talk to Jeff about that both on the program today and then on a very special edition of Before the Hedges coming up on Wednesday, where some of these guys are already starting to make their college preferences known. And we'll look forward to hearing and seeing a lot from that with Jeff coming up over the course of the next couple of days. Later on in today's show, another thing I kind of got to get into a little bit is Tom Crean has now apologized for his controversial comments from Saturday where he seemingly blamed the Georgia players for the loss of Ole Miss and some of the struggles that Georgia's had this season. I think there's an interesting retort that needs to be given to what Crean has said both on Saturday and then again yesterday, and we'll do all of that coming up in a minute on the program because certainly Crean was very heartfelt with the words that he used a day ago, so we'll kind of recap everything that's gone on with that. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today, brought to you by Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa, the beautiful, beautiful resort up there in Towns County, Georgia. We'll give you a chance to find out about some special offers and learn more about Brasstown Valley coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let me kind of keep at least the general theme of the conversation going that I was starting the program with, that when you look at some of the statistical projections that are out there, the SEC looks to be really strong in 2019. Not just Georgia and Alabama, the two teams that have been at the top for a while, but a lot of those teams below Georgia and Alabama are also looking, at least from a statistical projection base, to be really good this season. Now, you've also got other folks kind of weighing in on the same kind of stuff, the same way that the stat guys like to give their analysis this time of year. The gambling folks kind of come up and they sort of share their numbers a bit too. Well, Brett McMurphy retweeted this yesterday. McMurphy is the longtime college football reporter, citing some national championship odds from the Westgate Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. That's the Las Vegas Superbook, as it's known. And, well, as you might expect, Georgia's national championship odds right now are really, really high. Let me show you the tweet from McMurphy and kind of where Georgia fits into the conversation right now. The two teams that are the favorites, probably not a huge surprise given what they did a season ago. Clemson's at 2-1 right now. Alabama's at 5-2, which is 2.5-1, just slightly below Clemson in terms of the overall national championship odds. Then how about this for irony? You've got Georgia and Ohio State both at 8-1. The two teams who will be very much linked in conversation this year because of Justin Fields and Jake Fromm also right now have identical national championship odds. The third most likely teams to win it, tied for that, Georgia and Ohio State. Then below that, you got Michigan at 14-1, Oklahoma at 18-1, Texas at 25-1, and then a host of teams, including two teams on Georgia's schedule, Florida and Notre Dame, both at 30-1 to win the national championship. So I think beyond just the fact that Georgia and Ohio State both have the, the interesting quarterback story going on with Fields at Ohio State and Fromm at Georgia, I think there's something else that's kind of interesting in linking these two teams both at 8-1 right now. And when you look at what makes Ohio State and Georgia different, one of the things you see is, to go back to the Bill Connelly numbers for a moment, his preseason projections based on returning production and recent recruiting success and 5-year averages. If you look at Georgia, when you look at recruiting and returning production, the only team in college football right now that can say it has done better in recent years than Georgia in that regard is probably Alabama. Alabama is the team that ranks just ahead of Georgia. It's the only thing that drags down Georgia's rating whatsoever is the fact that over the course of the last 5 years, you've still got some of those 2014, 2015 seasons in there for Georgia. So if anything, that's probably not a huge surprise to my audience. If anything, I think that Georgia may be slightly underrated when it comes to that national championship odd. I think that Georgia actually at 8-1, if you look at the overall statistical profile, is actually probably a lot closer to Alabama and Clemson than you might think. But nonetheless, when you take a preview at the national championship odds right now, Georgia right there in the mix with the top teams in college football, and certainly that speaks to what is a year worth of very, very high expectations for UGA. It's Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily. Of course, it's brought to you by Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. And if you have not checked out Brasstown Valley, you need to. This is a beautiful resort right there in Towns County, Georgia. I've been there. I've seen the golf course. I've seen the mountains. I've felt the crackling fire in the fireplace, tasted the food that comes from the restaurant. This is a wonderful place to go and visit, and you're going to want to check it out. The website to go to is brasstownvalley.com. For special offers, for big events coming up, brasstownvalley.com. A beautiful, beautiful resort, especially, Valentine's getaways this time of year, heading towards some breaks from school maybe. A wonderful time to, be with that special someone in your life, your family, whatever. Go up there to the mountains. It's only a couple hours away from Atlanta, but you feel like you're a lot farther away than that. It really feels like a great getaway. Check out Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa at brasstownvalley.com. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, later on we will get into the Tom Crean apology from yesterday. We will deal with all of that, what he had to say initially, what led to the apology, and kind of what all this means and where we're going from here on that. But for now, though, more on the 2020 recruiting stories as they start to develop and everything else going on around UGA. Let's get ready to talk to our buddy Jeff Sintel right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jeff Sintel here on this Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. And Jeff, first of all, good morning to you. Thanks for being a part of the program. Hope you are doing well today.
Hey, Brandon. Hey, man. Good morning, sir. And you've got to allow me to dispense a pleasantry or two this morning.
By all means.
I'm going to dispense the pleasantry that I'm just simply going to say to a teammate, to a friend, to a good guy who likes to laugh a lot while he works. Happy birthday, man. Happy birthday, Brandon.
I really appreciate that, Jeff. Today is my birthday, so I appreciate you mentioning that and sharing that. And, yes, I am having a very happy birthday. So, Jeff, thanks for that, and I really appreciate that. And there's nowhere I'd rather be than doing DawgNation Daily and talking to you right now. So I really appreciate that.
So, first of all, guys, he probably is kicking himself under the table because he hates being made into a spectacle, because this is a very humble man, but sometimes you just got to drop the pleasantries and you got to say, happy birthday, dude. From all of us at DawgNation, we hope you have a very, very happy day.
Well, that's a really nice thing to say, Jeff, and I really do appreciate that. And obviously, there's a lot we do want to talk about here today, and I guess I am curious to find out your thoughts on this. We normally talk about big-time football recruits and success that UGA has in that sport and that arena and venue. Yesterday, Georgia got the nation's #1 basketball recruit, and I know Connor Riley wrote about this at DawgNation.com, the unique idea that Georgia could get the top football recruit and the top basketball recruit in the same year. That's something very few programs have done. It would seem like Georgia would be the least likely to do something like that. But how much does this help overall, just that growing brand of the Georgia G, which has been so prominent in football as of late, and now maybe heading that same direction in basketball? How much does the big news involving Edwards help the UGA brand overall in your mind?
Well, I guess it is a matter of, being the modern athletic program. If this was like 5, 6, 7 years ago, we would say that, the more energy in the stag for some of those official visit weekends when everybody drifts over, and watches the basketball team, that would have been a little bit more exciting. You know, and you also have to think about those Florida Gators, man, as mad as I had to bring them up. I mean, that's the last example in the SEC of a team that was, you know, maybe about 7-8 years ago that was nationally rated a top 5 program in both sports. I'm sure that would be the goal of Greg McGarity and the athletics department there. And I know some might think, is there a chance this Edwards guy could run a fade pattern or catch some back shoulders? I just see you really need to build some things. This would be sort of like, you know, Kirby Smart his first year just getting Jacob Eason and not Isaac Nada and Nicole Hardman and other players like that in terms of a first recruiting class. I think with basketball, you're limited to one season, especially for an elite guy like that before he would go pro. So I don't really know how much of an impact that the nation's number 2 overall basketball prospect, let's be sure and call him what he is right now, I don't know how much that of an effect that really has on the big picture of Georgia basketball, other than its great PR and a great win and a great first start for Tom Crean and his recruiting process.
And I guess is that final point that you make that's really the most important to me. And it is a little bit difficult to draw a straight line from one point to the other, but it's more about the recognition of that G. The same way in football, you know, it's very difficult to put a value on what it meant to Georgia to be in the Rose Bowl, what it meant to Georgia to be in back-to-back SEC championships, the television ratings. Kirby cited these before of being in the most highly rated games, you know, for the last couple of years, that it's hard to know what that's worth, but we can presume that it's worth something as the brand grows. And I think it's kind of the same thing for Anthony Edwards. The honest truth is, I don't expect Georgia to be some major NCAA tournament team with just one player like Edwards. We've seen enough recent examples to know that's not likely to occur. But there is a brand growth that occurs here. There is something kind of good and cool added to that Georgia G when a guy like this maybe goes on through Athens to become the number 1 pick in the 2020 draft. And I don't know that helps Georgia necessarily get a single football recruit, but it certainly doesn't seem to hurt.
You know what I think? I think maybe something that Tom Crean said recently that to me seems like maybe the most intelligent thing he said recently was when Tom Crean spoke about wanting to keep the guys in the state, wanting to make, you know, in-state players realize that they don't have to go anywhere else, that they can get everything, and they can make a name for themselves inside Stegman Coliseum and maybe see their jersey hang from the rafters. I think that's the thing Georgia has to deal with. If you look at this story, Edwards obviously wanted to stay close to home for family reasons and reasons very close to his heart, as you can see how he made his decision by unzipping that little one's jacket. So to me, I think what it is for Georgia basketball and Tom Crean is it's an example, and a very good example of how he doubled down on his NBA resume and his player development resume with guys like Dwayne Wade and Victor Oladipo. And you can see now that that's a guy that has built players like this, and the player recognized this, and it just takes the first one to realize, oh, look at Anthony Edwards. He came, he went to Georgia, he was the number 1 pick, he averaged 20 and 12 on his way to big things. I think that's where it starts.
Let me talk to you a little bit here about another player the football team just added, and that's the graduate transfer wide receiver Lawrence Cage. And I talked to Chip about this yesterday, and he said, B.A., I've heard you on this a million times, and I guess my point on this has been well-founded by this point, that I do truly believe that Georgia needed as much help at the wide receiver position as it could get, both in terms of what it lost to this year's NFL draft and just what it needs to stay up to date and kind of keep the pace that Clemson and Alabama have set with their outstanding wide receiver cores. From that standpoint, I think Lawrence Cager really helps. As you and I both said, the stats that he put up at Miami at least suggest the possibility of being a part of this rotation here at UGA. How do you think this fits into Georgia's plans, Jeff? And how do you think, you know, maybe make the comparison between Cager and some of the freshmen that we know are coming in Blaylock, that hopefully are coming in George Pickens? How do you think that the veteran presence Cager compares to guys like that?
Yeah, first of all, let's just see if we can make sure everybody gets more than just surface material reporting on Lawrence Cager. First of all, with Cager, you know, 6'5", 200, he's out of Maryland. He's not a Florida kid. And when he came out, he was only a 3-star wide receiver, and he's a top 50 wide receiver. Now, other names on the Georgia roster, a guy like Tommy Bush, for example, or even a better name like Matt Landers, Those guys were higher-rated receivers, but what this is an NFL-made, an NFL-ready body with that. I used this term when he made his decision, catch radius. And what that means is a huge circle for Jake Fromm to put a ball on somebody and make a big play. That definitely is the case with Lawrence Cager. That's definitely the case with George Pickens. I think a guy like Matt Landers still poises a very good shot at breaking through for Georgia. And all of a sudden you had three guys like that, and it's something that they're in Georgia's top 7 rotation at receiver, maybe swapping out guys like Riley Ridley, McCole Hardman, Jason Stanley, Terry Godwin. All of a sudden Georgia looks more like a bunch of power forwards or a lot of Javon Wims out on the edge, and that's where they look differently. But when we explore Cager, let's take the good and the bad. There's a clip of him out there across Twitter where he makes a big play over a Notre Dame cornerback that was a finalist for the Thorpe Award. That's good stuff. That's Lawrence Cager at his best. But I've been looking through some Miami stuff. I've been talking to some folks that cover Miami. Lawrence Cager is a guy that's not going to catch every ball. He's going to be a hit-or-miss guy, hot and cold guy. Maybe coaching in Athens under Cortez Hankton can streamline all those abilities with Cager. But I just want people to realize big body with lots of stats in college football, but he's not – I'm not expecting a guy like that to come in and be the alpha, the number 1, the number 2, or the number 3. I just think he's another big target and a different size body for Georgia.
So this is one of the reasons why I've always been so in favor of transfer players, and we're about to see an age in which transfer players are going to be even more prevalent. But one of the reasons why I believe that transfer players have value, based on your description you just provided of Cager, for me it's one of those scenarios where if he's on the field, that's obviously good news, because think about where Georgia would be without him. But if also this fall, if he's not on the field that much, that's an even higher bar that some other player had to cross to get on the field, whether it's more time for Tyler Simmons or if it's Demetrius Robertson, better in his second year at UGA than he was in his first. Having to beat out Cager to be on the field just makes that more of a valued presence once you get on the field. I just like adding the depth of the wide receiver room, whether it's Cager himself who pans out or not. It's another obstacle for other players to maneuver around if they want to get on the field, and that kind of competition is never a bad thing, right?
Yeah, so this is what I want to make sure, another point I want to make about Lawrence Cager. Didn't want to overwhelm guys with that first question there. But again, he's a kid that came out in 2015. So 2015, he redshirts in 2016, 2017, 2018. He's caught 10 career touchdowns in college football, which is good. But directly to your point, I want everybody to remember the name Demetrius Robertson. Robertson was a 5-star. Robertson was the nation's number 1 overall receiver in the 2016 class. He was actually younger than Lawrence Cager was when he entered college football. And yet, Demetrius Robertson had a transition period, even though he had some gaudy stats of his own, mind you, be it in a Pac-12 offense, but he came in more heralded. He came in with better stats and a more prolific first season in college football as a freshman All-American. Didn't immediately translate into playing time. One reason for that is there are a couple guys on the roster at Georgia, Terry Godwin, McCole Hardman, who essentially did the same things that Demetrius Robertson does, besides adjusting to the the Georgia program, the blocking, the overall aspects of the Georgia way. Cager's a little bit different. Cager's a guy that is one of the bigger bodies on the team. He'll be the biggest and most physically developed receiver on the team, and also one of the older receivers on the team with some true go-up-and-get-it ability. And I think that's where Lawrence Cager needs to be rationalized and maybe marginalized for Georgia fans. He's going to be a piece, a big body wideout piece, but I wouldn't expect him to become one of the SEC's top receivers.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, brought to you by our friends at Marlowe's Tavern. And don't forget, if you want to find out about big things happening to Marlowe's in your neighborhood, become a Marlowe's insider by texting the word Marlowe's, that's MARLOWS, to 24242. The number, once again, 24242. Text Marlowe's to 24242, and you can become a Marlowe's Tavern insider. All right, Jeff, let me give you a warning here, because this next question is certainly from the wishful thinking variety on my part, maybe. But, you know, when you look ahead to what's going to be happening in 2020, big names that we've already talked about a lot, we'll talk about a lot more, guys like Brian Brzee, Ari Gilbert, they also seem to have a little bit of a connection to Clemson right now, too. And Clemson's that one program in the South that seems to be going about its recruiting business just a little bit differently than Georgia and Alabama and some of these other major recruiting powers. But you've also had this news over the last couple of days where Dabo Swinney has seemingly acknowledged to the Charleston Post and Courier that, hey, maybe we accidentally gave this PED stuff to some of these guys going back to college football playoff. Do you think this story has any way of affecting how people look at Swinney on the recruiting trail? And obviously I'm self-serving by asking this because I'd love for guys like Brazee and Gilbert to be turned off by Swinney. But Swinney is that guy that sort of has that good guy image on the trail. Does this change that for him at all?
I don't think so, because I think in terms of pristine, spotless reputations on the recruiting trail, I think Clemson's is pretty good. And what Clemson is, let's be very careful when we say this. This is Mark Richt who won. This is Mark Richt who won the big games, and this is Mark Richt who signed franchise, cornerstone, program, icon quarterback after quarterback. Yes, he plays in the ACC. The degree of difficulty, as a fellow named Mike Griffith often opines on Twitter right now, ACC ball is not quite the same as SEC ball, and of course I agree with him there, but I think Dabo does so many things right. And he's won championships. He won 2 out of the last 3. He's getting his program among the Final 4 every year. Lots of checks. Yeah, sure, maybe this is a zit or a wart on Clemson's otherwise pretty pristine resume. You think about this, Clemson and Georgia. I've written about this already on our site, Brandon. Everybody wants to draw a line in the sand and, roll their sleeves up and expect another bare-knuckle recruiting brawl with Alabama. I think that's always going to be there, especially in conference. But I think the key recruiting head-to-head in 2020, I don't think it's going to be with Bama. I think it's going to be with Clemson. Clemson is trying to stack up a class, which would be a top 3, top 4, top 5 class. One of their rare classes. They're going after the biggest names. They're going after the 5-star quarterback from California, DJ Ungalele. They're going after Julian Fleming. They're going after Brian Brzee. They're going after Eddie Williams. They're going after Marshall Lloyd. They're going after all the big talents. This might be Clemson's best recruiting year. They're poised. If you look at where Clemson is at now and what they have for the next 2 years with Trevor Lawrence, this is probably as good as Clemson football is going to get. And this will be a key thing because look how Georgia's going to go to head with them with guys like Jacoby Cowan, guys like Mikael Sherman. You keep rattling off names, Rakeem Jarrett. You keep rattling off these names, and let's say Miles Murphy. Let's say Clemson beats Georgia for a lot of those guys. Or let's say Clemson and Georgia split for a lot of the 5 stars Georgia usually cleans up on or goes 4 for 5 or 5 for 6 on. That's going to make a difference in a 2020 class for Georgia fans that they expect to be all those things as well. Top 3, one of the best ever in program history. So that will be very fascinating to watch. Georgia and Clemson putting up their dukes on their recruiting trail for the 2020 class.
So with that in mind, I'm going to say that all is fair in love and recruiting, and may I suggest that those that are recruiting on behalf of the red and black make the suggestion to recruits of be careful going to Clemson. They're not even sure what they're feeding you. I would suggest that might be a negative recruiting message that might work right now. If Dabo's going to just shrug and say, I don't know how they got this stuff, be careful going to Clemson because your eligibility could be called into question at some point.
Well, they've got everything else. They've got the marvelous facilities. They got the bowling alley where they can be bowling, and then 25 minutes later they can be in the middle of spring practice. They've got the slide. They've got the championships. You see social media clips now of Dabo Swinney, who was a wide receiver in the SEC at Alabama, firing up jumpers and playing some half court there as well. Looks like the Clemson PR machine. They even went to the White House and had, I think, Newcastle hamburgers and Burger King and Big Macs and everything you want to say. This is a high PR arc for Clemson. It's a little bit smattered right now with the report of the PED issue. But remember this, Brandon, perhaps their top defensive lineman, perhaps their top overall prospect on the team, at least those guys that are eligible, doesn't play in the football playoffs, and yet Clemson still marches on to a national title. So a lot of good things that are happening there, and there's no question about that.
Well, let me try to do 2 quick things before we let you go. And the first one is not something I enjoy doing, but I do have to give a little bit of credit to Tennessee. there were 24/7, I guess, is the first to report this. I don't think it's become official yet. That Derek Ansley is going to become the Tennessee defensive backs coach. And, Jeff, there's no other way to say this. This is a real power move on the part of Pruitt if he's able to steal a defensive backs coach from the NFL, which my assumption is that the Raiders really wanted to keep. If Pruitt does make this hire, and right now I have no reason to believe that he won't, I'm assuming it's going to become official at any point now, how that's going to impact for the positive direction Tennessee's recruiting, I think you got to call this what it is, a major move that a lot of programs would have loved to have made and were incapable of making. This speaks pretty well of Pruitt, does it not?
Great. It looks like he's getting the backing from Philip Fulmer from the administrative level that he desperately needs. And to me, I'm going to lay this out, guys. For them to reel in Derek Ansley without adding the coordinator title to that is very interesting. And it's a lot of boss moves for Tennessee. All of a sudden, you look at what they've done with Chaney. You look what they've done with a guy like Kevin Shearer, who's already on staff. You've got Rocker there on staff. You've got a lot of pieces there. Now you add Derek Ansley. I'm going to say this, and DawgNation might want to hear it. Brandon might want to pound the table on his birthday, but Derek Ansley is going to recruit the best defensive backs in the country, I feel, as well as any recruiter and any defensive backs coach in the country. So Charlton Warren, anybody else in the SEC that's going to coach defensive back, Derek Ansley is the type of the guy that can be a major problem on the recruiting trail. He recruited well for Alabama. He's very well connected. He has NFL experience as well. And you look at Tennessee, slowly but surely, they pick up a 5-star linebacker in Quavaris Crouch. They pick up a 5-star tackle in Darnell Wright, a guy that probably shouldn't play in 2019, but will have to anyway for that line. They've got Wanye Morris as well. Tennessee is recruiting just about as well as anyone in the SEC not named Georgia, Alabama, or Texas A&M, especially when you include the coaching staff and the pieces that they're putting together.
Let me finish up with this. I loved your piece with Jacoby Cowan at DawgNation.com. That's a really interesting defensive end prospect to start thinking about for Georgia. And one of the things that stood out that Cowan had to say to you was talking about his relationship with Trey Scott. And we've kind of been over how Scott's starting to work his way into a really strong relationship with these elite defensive line recruits. But the other thing that Cowan mentioned is Larry Johnson from Ohio State. And I guess hearing him speak about Johnson, Jeff, reminded me of some of the same things that Brenton Cox said about Johnson a couple of years ago, and the way that he was respected as the kind of guy that can get you to the NFL. When you think about those elite reputations that certain coaches like Larry Johnson have had, how are these Georgia coaches growing in regards to that? Obviously, Pittman would seem to be there, and Dell McGee is certainly there in terms of that. But is a Trey Scott growing in a reputation from a standpoint that he can stand toe-to-toe with a Larry Johnson now, one of the top position coaches in the sport? Are Schumann and Lanning getting there? Is Charlton Warren going to be that kind of guy that can go head-to-head with a Derek Ansley we were just talking about? How would you see these relationships or these reputations progressing for some of these young Georgia assistants right now, Trey Scott included?
I think Hankins will get a boost by this year's draft, of course. I think there's basically an anchor developer coach when it comes to Georgia, and that's Kirby Smart. Smart already has the reputation from all those years at Alabama. Of course, Schumann catches notice, and everybody picks him out because of what Roquan Smith did in the 2017 season and now where he's at in the NFL. I think defensive line is a very good spot to start with, Brandon, because you need to see more key defensive line guys from Georgia moving on to the NFL and walking up onto the stage to shake Roger Goodell's hand. I think Lanning is going to have a tremendous run over the next 3 or 4 years of pipelining first and second and third round picks to the NFL. I think DeAndre Walker is going to do very well in the NFL draft as well, especially where he sits coming out of that combine. But the rest of them, the defensive line, I think you basically cataloged a lot of good places. James Coley at quarterback, does he get credit for the development of Jake Fromm, or is that Jim Chaney, or is it a lot on Fromm? The running back position, the offensive line position, those seem very good. The inside linebacker position, quarterback's going to start to look really, really sporty, Brandon, when you start adding DeAndre Baker and then the guys that Georgia has stacked up in recent years as well. There's just talent everywhere you look on the Georgia football team now. And the NFL is going to definitely highlight it and boldface it with draft picks to come in the near future.
So you wish me a happy birthday to start our conversation today, and I certainly appreciate that. But if you really wanted to give me a really nice happy birthday greeting, were you watching TV the other night? Did you see Bill Walton, the former basketball great, now ESPN basketball analyst, who ate the cupcake, the birthday cupcake with the candle still lit? Jeff, if you really wanted to be, giving me a birthday greeting, that's what you do right now. Maybe on tomorrow's edition of Before the Hedges, maybe you can do that. Just sort of devour the cupcake with the candle still lit. If you really wanted to send a happy birthday, that's what you do, I'm afraid.
That's what I do, huh? Do we need to be in costume again like Batman and Earth Russell or something like that to celebrate your birthday?
Listen, you never know.
We'll have to think of something, but hey, my friend, regardless, I hope you and yours and your immediate family take very good care of you. I hope they embarrass you. I hope one of your young ones smashes a cupcake in your face and updates the Gator Hater Countdown as the Brandon Adams countdown adds another year in 2019.
Well, Jeff, I do really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger.
All right, guys. Have a good week.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff with Jeff Sintel as we wrap up the Marlowe's Tavern Tell. Oh, by the way, speaking of Marlowe's, I'm actually looking forward to some lunch day at Marlowe's. We got a little lunch meeting. One of our guys came in and said, hey, where do you want to have the meeting? I said, listen, there's no other place I want to have it other than Marlowe's. So we're going to be heading to a Marlowe's Tavern for lunch today. What a great way to spend your birthday with a little lunch at Marlowe's. So I'm looking forward to that today. And, of course, we appreciate Jeff Sintel being a part of the program. And as we said, it's Before the Hedges presented by Kroger tomorrow with a lot more recruiting stuff. My understanding is it's a Reed Gilbert tomorrow on Before the Hedges. How about that? What a great way to get that 2020 cycle started off. A conversation that Jeff's recently had with one of the great tight end prospects not only the state of Georgia's ever produced, maybe the nation's ever produced. This is a big-time name to know for Georgia in its 2020 class, and that's tomorrow on Before the Hedges. What a great way to get the 2020 recruiting season started off with that. That's really exciting. By the way, speaking of Kroger, we're heading towards Valentine's Day on Thursday, and I've been telling you now for a while that Kroger's got you taken care of for Valentine's Day. Now, listen, special savings on candy. Now, here's the thing. For many of you, Valentine's means that special someone in your life that you're trying to impress. For me, it's sort of like keeping my kids happy at this point in time. And when you've got a very young daughter, my daughter's 3.5, Valentine's is a very big deal in my house. So I'm really glad to know that Kroger's got you taken care of. Listen to these savings. You got 2 for $6 M&M candies, $4.99 decorated cupcakes, Valentine's cards there as well. Great savings on a lot of really cool Valentine stuff. You can get that at the Kroger closest to you, so make sure you check that out. All right, a couple SEC stories I want to hit as a part of our SEC Through, and then we'll get into the Tom Crean stuff after that. We talked about Jeff with Derek Ansley. As I said before, I don't like giving Tennessee credit, but this is a pretty big move, and I have no reason to think this is not going to become official at any point in time. My understanding is Tennessee has not announced this yet, but it looks like Derek Ansley's on his way to becoming defensive backs coach at Tennessee. They got rid of Terry Fair, the ex-defensive backs coach. That's actually a Vol legacy, so pretty shrewd or ruthless, depending on your definition, to move the Vol for Life Fair out so we can bring in Derek Ansley. But if you have a chance to hire Derek Ansley, that is what you do. Now, for me, this is not buyer's remorse with Charlton Warren. There was the report from Mike Griffith at DawgNation.com that Georgia was interested in Ansley. It's not really necessarily that big of a surprise. 24/7 also reported that Alabama tried to hire Derek Ansley away. So this was a coveted defensive backs coach during this cycle because of his recruiting prowess, going back to time working at places like Alabama. I would have really liked to have Ansley. That was the number one name on my list when it was out there. I don't know that Charlton Warren is a better hire than Derek Ansley, but it's kind of a fine hire, right? Warren's got the big-time experience now. He's bounced around a little bit, been to a couple different places, had some great success recruiting defensive backs at Florida. Yes, he missed on Kyra Lam a couple of, for the February edition of National Signing Day, but you obviously didn't hire Charlton Warren for just one player. Overall, as a Georgia fan, I remain fine with Warren as the Georgia defensive backs coach. But make no mistake about it. With Derek Ansley doing his thing at Tennessee now, there's going to be pressure on Warren to keep up. Big-time recruits, elite defensive backs, not missing these guys to Florida because the way that Florida's positioned itself as the, quote, defensive back university. The presence of Ansley in the SEC once again is just what I talked about at the top of the program. all of a sudden this league, not just Alabama and Georgia, but the rest of the league, it starts to feel and seem a good bit deeper than it was not too long ago. This is definitely a story worth watching. Another story worth watching, it looks like there's some media reports coming out that, and we mentioned this the other day as a possibility, but it was kind of mentioned in concert with a bunch of different names. It looks like, according to some, Todd Grantham may actually be the favorite to become Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator. Now, at one point in time, Mike Elko was mentioned here. That's the A&M defensive coordinator. He may be more likely to become a college head coach at some point in time. You've had who's the old Jacksonville coach that wore the suit? Jack Del Rio. Del Rio has been mentioned as a candidate for this job, but according to some reports that are out there, Grantham would be the favorite. Now, this would be, I think, for Florida, a pretty big loss, just given the fact of when it happens, and as the coaching cycle has kind of spun a bit. I think Florida fans will tell you, and this is not just me being a Gatorator, Florida fans themselves were not too happy with the defensive line coach that Mullen recently hired. He kind of reached back to his past to pull some guy, I think David Turner, I think his name was, from kind of a lower-level program that had worked with Mullen before. Don't let Florida fans kid you. If they're in a position to have to replace Todd Grantham as defensive coordinator, I think there's going to be some anxiety and some nerves about exactly who Florida might be replacing him with. Speaking of anxiety and nerves, I guess there's some of this around Auburn right now, as Calvin Ashley, a former 5-star offensive limeman, has decided to put his name in the transfer portal. Now, Ashley's story at Auburn's been kind of an interesting one. He actually, I think was thought maybe one of these guys who could step in and kind of play right away. That didn't really happen for him. Jack Driscoll, a graduate transfer, came in a year ago, ended up taking some of the playing time that some people kind of thought was going to go to Ashley. Ashley had kind of an undisclosed medical issue, and now he's looking to move on from the program. And what this ends up being, and you can start rattling off these names yourself, whether it be, Byron Cowart and others. Auburn has had a really hard time. Gus Malzahn in particular has had a really hard time holding on to the 5-star player. A lot of those 5-star players who've come into the Auburn program have then decided to leave the Auburn program. Transfer has been a big issue for Malzahn as it is, particularly of the 5-star variety. Now, Ashley can do like others have done, which is put his name in their transfer portal and then take it right back out. He can stay at Auburn. He doesn't have to leave just because he goes in the portal. But if this does happen, it's going to continue a trend for Auburn, which is losing a lot of these guys to transfer, especially of that 5-star variety. Another problem for Gus Malzahn to deal with at Auburn. We'll make that your SEC through. All right, let me address the Tom Crean stuff for a minute here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you who may have missed yesterday's show or missed what Crean said on Saturday, let me start with the initial statement that was seen as controversial. Georgia got blown out again by Ole Miss. It was a game in which Georgia had a lot of former basketball players in the building. That was an important day for Tom Crean, and Georgia not only did not play well, it didn't seem to have the full effort and the full focus. And Crean was frustrated about that, so much so that he said at the time that he made a mistake by keeping certain players on the team. He didn't go into specifics as to who those players are, but this really did not sit well with a lot of people, almost as if Crean were blaming the players for the struggles this season instead of taking that responsibility for himself. Here is what Crean said that started all of this.
It's all on me because I'm the one who decided to keep these guys. It's all on me. And I get it, because the last thing I can do with making decisions on keeping guys in the program in the spring, okay, is now get overly mad at them because I'm the one that made the decision. So I live with that every day. And it doesn't mean that they're not great kids. But very few programs, when there's a takeover, okay, when you have guys that haven't done it at any point in time really in their career, a lot of those guys, they move on. That's what happens in a job change, and I didn't do that. And so I'm not going to complain, and we just got to keep doing everything we can do to fix it and make it better.
Crean's words got some national attention. It seemed like a bad look in some people's mind for a coach to say that about his players. And when Crean had a chance to speak with reporters again yesterday, he actually issued an apology, and as Chip Towers described it, a profuse one for what he had said on Saturday. Let me let you now hear Crean's apology for what appeared to be throwing his own players under the bus. Here's Crean again.
It's been heavy on my mind since Saturday night, and I bet you can probably imagine. I wanted to wait till we got in front of you guys. I definitely thought about putting out a statement, but I thought it'd be better to do it this way. When I saw my comments that I made, I always try to get our players to understand, like, you can't let frustration set in. And I always preach that, and I try to be very cognizant of that, and I think I did. I think I let the losing of that game, I think I let the fact that we had those Lettermen there, but our fans in general, because I didn't think we played with the spirit and the passion that we need to. I look back at those comments when I saw them, and it's like I was blaming the players. That was never my intent. It was never my intent to do that. My intent, I started out, however I said it, and if I'd have started out with saying that I tell them all the time that I believe in them. And if I didn't believe in them, they wouldn't be here. But I do. And I didn't say that, and that was a mistake. I am definitely sorry to them, which I've apologized to them. And we've talked through a lot of things, but I definitely apologize to them for that. Anybody else that offended, because that was never the intent.
I said on yesterday's show that I think of Crean as a media-savvy coach compared to really any coach in any walk of college athletics. He's been very friendly with the media, done a lot of big-time interviews, national and whatnot, been an analyst himself. So this guy knows how to use the spoken word to his advantage. And I had a hard time believing that Crean's initial statement on Saturday was some sort of emotionally driven misspeak. To me, it seemed more like a calculated message to send out to people who really care about Georgia basketball that we're going to raise the talent level in this organization. If nothing else, we're going to raise the level of focus and intensity this team plays its games with. But it was really received, I don't want to say mostly negative, but there was enough negative criticism of what Crean had to say where maybe backtracking those words became inevitable. Here's what I think that we're kind of living in, which is a very weird time to be alive, where what somebody says is somehow worse than what other people do. Because what Crean says happens in college athletics all the time. I mean, how many football coaches around college football are always looking for, and I use air quotes for this, scholarship relief? What do you think that is? I mean, that is looking at a player who's you thought was going to be good enough at one point in time who turns out not to be good enough, and now you're trying to bring in a better player to replace him. This has been going on in college athletics, football, and basketball for a long time. Because Crean gives some spoken words to that, all of a sudden he's the pariah. All of a sudden he's the one that's crossed some line for actually talking out loud about what has been obviously going on in college athletics for quite some time. I don't quite know what you do with that and how you reconcile that, but it's an obvious hypocrisy when we're mad at somebody for saying something, but not mad at other coaches for actually doing that thing. But nonetheless, Tom Crean soldiers on. By the way, Gatorheader Updater, it's now been 836 days since those lousy sneaking Gators have beaten Georgia. That's good news. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, I'm really excited to say, welcome back to the most recent edition of our R.S. Andrews cool down as we kind of come down off the high of doing a show, the energy and the enthusiasm of talking Georgia football, and now we give you a chance to react as we kind of go into the cool down phase here, brought to you by our friends at R.S. Andrews. Spirited comments, of course, every single day, and I'm sure today will be no different on that. So we'll pull up some of these comments, and we'll get rocking and rolling here. And no doubt Connor Riley will join us at some point in time as well. It's really good to have you on the program. I thought Jeff had some really interesting things to say today, and, of course, I certainly appreciate him wishing me a happy birthday. Let me go get in here. Matt Rukavina says word on the street is that Zeus is pushing 240 pounds right now. I haven't seen him, so I can't really tell you what he's weighing right now, but I imagine he's going to be in great shape by the time the season rolls around. Mike Mazzell wishes a happy birthday. I appreciate that. Chad Thomas Black brings up a pretty good point. I probably should have mentioned this to the SEC through. This may be 2 days in a row that I've missed something for the see-through that I should have. Ole Miss vacates 2 years' worth of wins. Included in that was the 2016 game against Georgia, which were in a lot of ways maybe one of the worst games that Georgia's ever played. To go, it turned out to be a fairly average Ole Miss team and get blown out there in Oxford in what was a scorching hot day. I think if Georgia had its way, it'd be more than just erasing the victory for Ole Miss, but actually erasing the entire day itself. That may be true, for sure. John Paul Oviedo, thanks for the happy birthday message. Hayes Calloway as well, thank you so much. Amos Williams says, when looking at the upcoming season, my only worry is our backup quarterback situation. I'm just praying Fromm has a healthy year. And indeed, this is one of those years, unlike what Georgia would have been in last year, where it had that, elite, capable backup behind Jake Fromm, the same way that Alabama's had Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. The same way a couple of years ago, Oklahoma's backup for Baker Mayfield was Kyler Murray. Georgia does not seemingly have that guy waiting the wing. Maybe at some point in time, Dwan Mathis is a really good quarterback prospect. Maybe Stetson Bennett shows during games what he's shown the Georgia defense during practices before. He's obviously a big favorite with his teammates already based on his work in previous years as the scout team quarterback. But to our eyes right now, I agree with Amos. If Fromm has an injury, it's game over. at least in terms of a national championship pursuit, in terms of really being in the mix of the college football playoff, Georgia does not have that obvious backup quarterback. As I've said before, what you kind of hope it does have, though, is that Chase Bryce level player, that player that can come in for 2.5 quarters and allow you to sneak out of a game as a winner, and then hopefully your starting quarterback is back healthy again for the following Saturday. Maybe somebody on this roster becomes that, because if it's 3 or 4 games worth of a backup quarterback with the schedule that Georgia plays this year, the likelihood of remaining undefeated is just not very high. I agree with that. Mike Mazzell says Fromm needs to work on his running ability. Certainly athleticism is something that Trent Dilfer brought up, the quarterback guru, the head coach, so to speak, of the Elite 11 quarterback camp. We asked him a couple of weeks ago, what does Jake Fromm need to do to become a first-round draft pick quarterback in 2019 for the 2020 NFL draft? What would he have to do to put himself in that conversation? That's the thing that Dilfer also mentioned, was that athleticism. Now, I'd be very curious to find out how a quarterback works on his athleticism. I'd be very interested to find that out. But that was something that Dilfer did bring up, that he wanted to see more athleticism from Fromm at the quarterback position. Let me pull up YouTube here for a moment. Let me pull up YouTube here for a moment, get some YouTube comment as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. All right, over here on YouTube here for a moment. Antonio Jones says, Amir, we're waiting on you. Can't wait to see you carrying the rock. And yeah, we talked off the top of the program today about a couple of interesting projections for Georgia. Georgia number 2 right now in Bill Conley's preseason projections, the S&P Plus. Georgia third most likely odds win the national championship according to the Westgate Superbook. Think about how much those odds even change for the better if all of a sudden Zamir White comes back from injury and looks like the guy that we all saw in high school. I mean, think about that for a moment. People say, well, it's high school. You know, what are you going to do on that? All I can go by is what I was told. And what I've been told from folks when Zamir White was healthy, this was an all-time prospect, and a top-level, top-shelf elite prospect when healthy. Now, how much of that version survives 2 consecutive knee injuries? Who knows? We'll have to really wait to see on that. But imagine for a second if it's good news. After all, that is a possibility. Sometimes it seems like the breaks go against UGA, and the only luck Georgia has is bad luck. It is also possible to have some good luck. What if Zamir White recovers in such a way that he just looks like the same old guy, that the injuries themselves are not dire enough that he's dealing with that kind of thing? That could be really fun to see. That could be really fun to see. William Simmons says on the subject of Fromm that he's already in the conversation for the first round. All he needs to do is improve on his stats, and he's set for the first round. He's already projected as the second quarterback taken. So, William, here's where I'm going to both plead ignorance and give a somewhat educated opinion. The ignorance part of this is I do not follow the NFL draft nearly as closely as I follow the college football stuff. It's just not my deal. Everybody has things they like and things they don't. The NFL draft may be my least favorite thing in all of sports for the way it gets talked about by the analysts who talk about it for a living. But the one thing I am somewhat educated on, though, is that the early draft projections have a way of really being wrong. That they're not based on the kinds of things that teams or that teams really use when they draft players. The closer you get to the draft process, the more that the draft analysts' opinions are being based on what they've heard from other people within the NFL circuit. For an early 2020 projection, no true NFL guy, I'm talking about front office employee, no true NFL guy is whispering anything about these guys yet, because my belief is the GMs of this league, the scouts of this league, haven't gotten really, really serious about crunching the film on Fromm yet because they're too busy worried about all the players that are going to be in this spring's NFL draft. So the really early projections 2 years ahead of time, they have a tendency just to be really, really wrong because they are based on common opinion as it's understood right now, and not the educated opinion that'll be reflected a year from now after one more year of film from Fromm and more experts, true professional paid NFL employees whispering behind the scenes about what they really think about Fromm. So for the better or for the worse, the projections on a lot of these players are going to change. It doesn't mean that Fromm won't be a first-round pick if he decides to leave after the 2019 season, but the early projection, this kind of stuff, is little more than just conjecture. Dapper Dan on the subject of Tennessee says Tennessee's building an offensive line. And that is, I think, a fair point to bring up. Now, I still expect Georgia to be the overwhelming favorite in the SEC East this year. Still expect Georgia to win that division. But when you look at the possibility that two young offensive tackles like Wanya Morris on one side and Darnell Wright on the other, you can't deny that Tennessee's done some things pretty well to be able to bookend its offensive line that way. Now, I think that Tennessee's still missing a good bit. I don't really know who the playmakers in offense are going to be, especially for 2019. This may still be a Tennessee team that's very much a work in progress, but there's no denying that there's some bricks and mortar things that football teams need. Tennessee's bringing those in. There's no denying that. AM Fitness says, remember the fan reception that Fromm got on senior night against Kentucky when he had to leave due to injury? I think the fans finally get it. Listen, I think that Georgia fans are certainly rallying around Fromm this year for a very big year. And one of the reasons why I think that Fromm is one of the reasons why I think that Georgia is as much of a national championship contender as I believe it can be. A lot of that certainly centers around Jake Fromm for sure. Joe Rush says, I'm going to take Nolan Smith and Brenton Cox over Wanya Morris any day. And I understand where Joe's coming from on that. I believe he's probably right. And I do think, not to get too deep into this, but I do think that seeing Wanya at Tennessee is going to be a really interesting evaluation of how Georgia views offensive linemen compared to Tennessee. I mean, let's face it. Georgia does not recruit offensive linemen like Wanya Morris right now. Wanya Morris is a 5-star, but too small to play on Georgia's offensive line. Now, somebody's wrong here. Either other teams are wrong for not valuing big offensive linemen as much as Georgia does, or Georgia's wrong for assuming that only big offensive linemen fit the bill of being offensive tackles. We're going to find out over the course of the next 3 years if the Georgia philosophy really is the dominant philosophy, the one that leads to championships, or if Georgia's been too obsessed with the big offensive linemen. I happen to think that Georgia's probably smart for doing what it's doing. I go back and look at the SEC championship game where, you had Isaiah Wilson playing in a game like that for the first time in his career against a truly elite team on the other side of Alabama. I thought he held his own in that game for sure, and I think his size really helps him do that. It's just really hard to move a big offensive lineman. I hate to be so elementary and simplistic, but it just is. It's really hard to do that. So Georgia's made the choices that it's made to go after these big guys. And in a year like 2019, where, with the exception of Clay Webb, some of the offensive linemen that Georgia signed, there might be a question of, well, how elite are these guys projected to be? But the one thing they do have that Pittman really wants and that Smart really wants is that big-time size. Wanya didn't have that, and for whatever reason, he was never connected to Georgia, nor Georgia was never connected to him. Georgia has just seemingly made a different choice. Tavares Taylor already upset with the Atlanta AAF team. Yeah, had they lose by 40 points of the night to that Orlando bunch, that's seemingly a problem. As I said before, I would have made Aaron Murray the quarterback. I definitely would have done that. Van Bird says the bigger the better for Pittman with the offensive line. Yeah, that seems to be the strategy. Phil Rogers, as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down, says Coley needs to open up the playbook and put Cook in the slot. Offensive line needs to get meaner and maul people. I don't think there's any doubt the offensive line has been mean and mauling people. I got no problem with that. As far as a little more creativity, a little more uses for James Cook, I definitely hope we see that. Going into a sophomore season, if James Cook is the player we were told he was coming out of high school, there's no reason why we shouldn't see a big performance from him this year. And how Georgia chooses to use him, that's Coley's responsibility. I think that's a big part of that equation for sure. For sure. Miriam Martin Corbin says about the AAF game, not only did Atlanta lose bad, it lost to Spurrier too, which is never a good thing. Miriam, you're right about that. John Anthony says the Legends coach doesn't seem to recognize talent very well. They've had some issues. Now, I love the fact that our buddy Cameron Nisley's getting to punt for the Atlanta team. I think he's going to make a great name for himself doing that. But you had the deal where, like, Brad Childress left real quick, and he's going back to the NFL, I guess. And Michael Vick was supposed to be the offensive coordinator, and now he's doing I don't even know what, not calling plays anymore, though. So it's been kind of a weird run for the AAF team. But one of the things I was kind of amazed with yesterday, just kind of spending some time on the internet, is how much coverage the league is getting. There are a ton of stories out there on the major national websites about this stuff. Now, for the most part, y'all don't care about media, things like that. But this is clearly going to be a pretty big deal from a media standpoint because the media sees this as a chance to write about football. So that was kind of an interesting thing to see. Mike Mazzell says James Cook will be our X factor. I hope so. I hope that he's thought of highly enough to be used as that X factor. Georgia needs what Cook brings to the table. That speedy change of pace, both as a running back and as a slot guy. I hope he gets that chance. It's one of the reasons why, not that I would have turned down Mark Anthony Richards as a part of the 2019 class, but when you saw the quotes that Mark Anthony Richards gave to Jeff Sentell, the way in which Georgia told him he could be used, as I've said before in the show, I wanted to see and still want to see James Cook used that way. And hopefully the way in which Georgia went after Mark Anthony Richards, hopefully that's not a signifier that they're unhappy with James Cook, that somehow Cook is behind schedule or not what they want him to be. I hope that's not the case. He's too good of a talent. And in a year in which Georgia's trying to keep pace with Alabama, getting the most use out of all your top-level prospects is a pretty important thing, and that includes James Cook. Ronald Lee Shepard says, with 2 downfield receivers over 6'3", we need to see big plays this year in the throwing game. Makes both aspects of the offense open up. Well, I think you're absolutely right about that, and I hope it ends up being true. I just think that there are too many examples of wide receivers facing single coverage right now for Georgia where they ought to be able to use size or speed, one or the other, to take advantage of that. I think that element has been there for Georgia, and Georgia hasn't used it enough. I think that's probably true. I don't think you have to change the overall nature of your offense to get more out of that. For instance, you can still be 60-40 run, and when you do throw, you go for the big throws even more. I'd really like to see that. Matt Bogue says, what was Smart's prediction off the top of the program? Matt, we talked about the way that a couple of years ago, or not quite 2 years ago, but before the end of the 2017 season, Smart talked about what he thought was an SEC growing to be a little bit more competitive, a little bit more parity, not just Alabama dominating everybody else, but other teams kind of rising up. And there's some statistical projections out there right now that would seem to suggest that Smart was right about that. All of a sudden that this league is quickly becoming more than just Georgia and Alabama, and that's going to be a challenge for both the Crimson Tide and the Bulldogs to deal with. James Bryant says, one of the things that Hardman and Godwin could both use was a little more size. Listen, I think both those guys had really good careers at Georgia, and I think that, it's good to have both things, right? I mean, Hardman's obviously a blazing speed guy, and you've seen how that's worked for Alabama's Jalen Waddle, for instance. Terry Godwin did, I think, for Georgia a lot of things well. I think he learned the position really well over the course of his time, but there is something to be said for that just big, tall receiver, that ability to go up and get the football. That's a pretty valuable commodity for sure. For sure.
So this question was asked in our YouTube comment. Which SEC East team worries you the most heading into 20? Which SEC East rival poses the biggest threat by the 2020 season?
That's a really good question. So I think that I'm tempted to answer this question 2 different ways. If you want to talk about tough to deal with in the immediate, I think it's a team like Florida more so than a team like Tennessee. But over the course of the next 5 years, I see issues growing at Tennessee that could be more problematic for Georgia than what Florida's going to be able to do over the long haul. When you look at what some of the big time names that Tennessee's brought in this year, that is not enough to create a impressive roster overnight, but it does give you some evidence of what Pruitt may be able to do over the long haul. If you said right now, take Georgia out of this for a second, because this is going to seem like it's a critique of Georgia, and it's not. Just forget about Georgia for a minute. Which coach is more likely to win a national championship, Jeremy Pruitt or Dan Mullen? My answer is Jeremy Pruitt. So if you want to bring Georgia back into the conversation and say, hey, which of these programs over the long haul is more of a problem right now, Tennessee or Florida? For me, it's Tennessee. And historically, that's not been the case. The reason why we started the Gator stuff when we did start it was because of my belief that Florida was always going to loom as a major issue for Georgia. But listen, Florida State's not going to be a doormat in recruiting forever. And one way or another, either Taggart's going to get better or they're going to replace him. Manny Diaz, I think, is going to be a lot more aggressive than Mark Richt has been. They're going to have a lot fewer decommitments, for instance, than Rick suffered over the last couple of years. He had something close to, 40 decommitments or something in 2 years. So it's going to get a little harder in the state of Florida, and Dan Mullen's only barely scratching the top 10, even as is right now. So on the field, Florida's still the tougher game. But program to program over the next 5 years, Tennessee's a lot more difficult right now for Georgia to deal with.
I don't know if you're going to like my answer, but I'm not too worried about any SEC going forward. With Florida, I just think it's a talent thing, and for whatever reason, we have over a decade of proof now. Dan Mullen has struggled against Kirby Smart. Just, very rarely has it played out well in favor, let alone, he just can't even really keep it close against Kirby Smart. The last time a Dan Mullen-led team beat a team with Kirby Smart on the coaching staff, Tim Tebow hadn't even ruined the Georgia Dome yet with those tears of his. So, and as far as Tennessee, I see and understand your point about talent, but I still have a lot of questions about Jeremy Pruitt as the program manager, the coach. I don't think Missouri was significantly more talented than Tennessee was this year, but Missouri still beat the doors off of Tennessee when they played.
They did, and I think that Missouri is a tough out. Now, that doesn't, as you said, that doesn't explain the huge, disparity in win-loss thing. Maybe, listen, it's not my, intention to really tout for Jeremy Pruitt, but maybe the loss to Missouri is similar to that loss that Georgia suffered to Ole Miss in 2016. It's just an example of a first-year coach who just didn't quite have it together as of yet. I certainly don't think that Tennessee has the kind of dramatic year two turnaround under Jeremy Pruitt, but as a person that would like to see Tennessee fail, knowing that Pruitt's a little bit of a hothead, knowing that he's kind of a, short fuse, you almost root for something bad to happen for him early in his tenure, because the longer he goes without that happening, the more he does get his sea legs under him a little bit, and it becomes a lot less likely to happen. I mean, I've said before, the micromanaging of Philip Fulmer is going to end up being a problem there, whether it be being at practice and leading to a minor secondary NCAA violation, whatever. There's just too much athletic director at Tennessee right now. But the longer that goes without kind of coming to a head, the more Pruitt starts to get enough stature within Knoxville, enough political power that he can push back on Fulmer a bit. If something were to happen this year where, we saw Tom Crean apologize this week. If Pruitt's in a position where he has to apologize for something this year, that's a potential problem. But the longer he goes without having to issue a public apology, the more likely it becomes that he just eventually becomes a veteran head coach, and these demeanor issues that could be in existence for him just never come about.
Does losing by Vanderbilt to 25 not count as somewhat worrying?
Yeah, there's.
Granted, yes, they beat Kentucky 24-7 in November, and then they promptly come out and lose by 33-25 final game against teams that are as equally talented.
I just think that what you're going to see is that over the course of time, you're making judgments on a year, and like I said, I am not trying to argue for Tennessee, although I just think it's fair to point out that you're making judgments on what happened in a year where Tennessee overall is just not a talented team. Tennessee was not a talented team in 2018. They just weren't. I mean, you can point to a couple different players and say, oh, I like that player, wouldn't mind seeing that guy at Georgia. But for the most part, you could be fairly disregarding of the overwhelming majority of the Tennessee roster. But in 2019, it's going to look a little different. It's going to all of a sudden you're adding in a Morris and a Darnell Wright. It's going to be the second year of J.J. Peterson. It's going to be the Toto kid mixed into the mix there. All of a sudden you're starting to add some of these guys in, and the more of those you start to populate the roster with, I don't care if Jeremy Pruitt's a good X's and O's coach or a bad X's and O's coach. It's just going to get harder to beat them the more they're adding guys like this in. And the presence of a guy like Ansley just makes that even more likely.
So I certainly understand the talent point, but even I've long had questions about Jeremy Pruitt in terms of managing his teams and sort of getting his side of the ball, getting his unit up the game. A perfect example is the 2014 Georgia-Florida game. That was a game. Again, Georgia had superior talent to Florida that year, and they gave up 400 rushing yards to a Florida team that wasn't by any stretch of the great rushing. And while a lot of people may want to put that on Rick and the Todd Gurley thing, that has to fall on Pruitt in some way. You can't give up 400 yards rushing to any team, let alone a team that is offensively inept.
Here's what I think is going to be really interesting for Tennessee as part of R.S. Andrews' cool down. I don't yet know if the hire of T. Martin is a good hire or a bad hire. T. Martin kind of brought in, I think they actually gave him the co-offensive coordinator title. What they really brought him in is to be the offensive recruiter. Jim Chaney's not a recruiter. T. Martin, they think, can be. Martin has gotten awarded before as a good recruiter, but that's mostly because he's been a part of programs that recruited well. You know, Martin really wore out his welcome at USC. I just mentioned before, Tennessee has kicked off a Vol for Life coach off its coaching staff with Terry Fair. I can't yet decide if T. Martin's the move you have to make if you're getting rid of an ex-Tennessee player on your coaching staff, or if they really have brought in Martin because they think he is going to be able to really recruit the offensive side of the ball. I don't yet know the answer to that question, but in terms of does Tennessee ever grow up to be a real threat to Georgia, I think T. Martin, that offensive assistant role that he was brought in to fill this year, I think he could do a lot to determine that one way or another.
So I understand the reputation Martin has as being a great recruiter, but that offensive staff with Chaney, who certainly has some questions about him, even predating his time at Georgia and whatever you want to think of that, and Martin as well, with a coach who doesn't seem all that, who's come out and publicly said he doesn't think an offensive coordinator is all that important. Doesn't that kind of give you pause for maybe the direction of the program? Or much as we like to make about how great Kirby is as a defensive mind and the defensive staff, the top 5 Georgia offense.
Yeah, absolutely.
The year before.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think that the Martin part of this is going to be really crucial because we know that Jim Chaney's not going to recruit anybody. He's going to call, he's called plays in a lot of different offenses. I think the play calling will be fine. Some of y'all hate Chaney. I've never quite felt that way. I think that'll be fine. But is T. Martin going to be able to find offensive talent there? He may not be able to. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if he was, that good of a coach, he wouldn't have been essentially shoved out the door at USC. So there's a chance that Martin's being brought back to kind of rekindle the magic of a 1998 national championship season, of which he was the quarterback for, and that he's just not going to be able to bring in the offensive talent the way they need to. They're going to recruit defensive guys for sure, especially now that you've added Derek Ansley. And I think that, people think of the ex-Georgia guy as a DC there as a good recruiter. But offensively, they're going to have to find those elite playmakers, and it remains to be seen if they're going to be able to do that.
On Facebook, Amos Williams brings up, we need to pay close attention to Georgia Tech. They're going to get stronger, quicker, yada, yada, yada. Here's my take on Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to, pump their chests about signing Jamiris Griffith out of Rome. Go ahead. What Kirby Smart needs to do is he needs to try and reclaim Waffle House. Waffle House is too good of a brand and too good of a restaurant to let Jeff Collins try and, claim it as theirs. Waffle House deserves better than a 7-5 Jeff Collins. Waffle House deserves 11-1, 12-0 SEC championships. When Georgia goes in and plays Georgia Tech this year, when they beat them in Atlanta, I think Georgia needs to find some way to eat Waffle House in Georgia Tech Stadium. They want to, try and claim Waffle House as theirs.
I think this is one of your best takes. I really do. Now, obviously, for many people who are not aware, Jeff Collins, the Tech coach, is famous for going. I think he goes Waffle House every morning. He's a big Waffle House guy, and there's been a lot of talk about that. Now, we know that Jeff Collins could go to any Waffle House in any part of the state and not be recognized, so it's a lot easier for him to eat at Waffle House. Kirby Smart cannot walk into a Waffle House. If Kirby Smart walked into a Waffle House, it'd be like, Elvis, coming into a Waffle House. It's very difficult for him to go into a restaurant like that. But a lot of Georgia fans do like Waffle House, and I do think there's a job here of reclaiming this. And I've always felt like the Georgia Tech rivalry could just use a little more juice. I've always felt like that one of the problems that this rivalry has is that Georgia and Georgia Tech don't necessarily value the same things. As I've said before, it's sort of like tractors versus protractors. It's just like two very, very different fan bases. But maybe this is the thing. Loser can't eat at Waffle House for a year.
I agree.
Georgia takes Waffle House from Georgia Tech. That actually makes the rivalry a lot juicier at that point in time.
Jeff Collins probably doesn't even get anything.
Yeah, he probably does. And
doesn't even order an All-Star.
And listen, I can't take Georgia Tech seriously as of yet. Now, I think they're going to get some players. It's like Marcus Ezard is a name we mention on this show when he went to the transfer portal. He's going to Georgia Tech. It's unusual to have any player that we'd mentioned on this show end up going to Georgia Tech. So from that standpoint, Jeff Collins has changed things. But just do this mental exercise. Think about the gap that exists right now between Georgia and programs like Florida and Auburn from a recruiting standpoint, from a talent standpoint. Georgia has a significant talent advantage over teams like that. Now, think in your mind about how big the talent gap is between programs like Florida and Auburn and Georgia Tech. That's the chasm that exists between Georgia and Georgia Tech right now. Georgia Tech's got a lot of rungs up the ladder it's got to climb before it's going to be taken seriously by Georgia. Now, it gets to play Georgia head-to-head, and so from that standpoint, I guess it'll, be a source of curiosity. But there's a huge, huge chasm between not only Georgia and Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech and most of the teams that Georgia typically plays. We are running a little bit late here. Connor, you got a final thought of anything?
Kirby Smart can't afford to lose Waffle House.
No,
I can't let it happen.
I would be more than. I mean, listen, that game's already kind of sleepy Saturday after Thanksgiving. There's not a lot of pizzazz around that game. Getting Waffle House involved, I think, is a really good idea.
DawgNation invasion at a Waffle House in Atlanta after the Tech win.
I think that's a really good idea. Funny line from Philip Jordan Wells in the Facebook comment section. Good stuff. Y'all, thanks for being here with us today. Really appreciate you sharing the birthday edition of DawgNation Daily. I'm trying to make too big of a deal about my birthday. My gift to the world is like one less narcissist blabbering on about his birthday. That's kind of my thing there. So I try not to talk too much about that. But nonetheless, we appreciate you sharing it with me today. I'm back tomorrow. I will say this. I'm going to talk to the larger audience about this tomorrow. We're coming up on some time off for me. I am not going to be here Friday and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but back next Thursday and here for the foreseeable future without any kind of days off. So we are taking a little time off wrapped around this upcoming weekend, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So no DawgNation Daily coming up then, but we will have DawgNation Daily tomorrow, including our R.S. Andrews cool down. I love this time of day, our chance to interact and talk with you. We appreciate you being a part of it with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here for the normal show tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily Live. Have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you then.